Welcome back to part 3 of how to make a quick mead. Again, we're really excited about the Great Beverage Showcase happening at Ethelmark War Practice this year, and we hope that this means if you've gone to part 3 that you're really excited to enter and participate in the competition as well. There are a couple of timeline things here that are going to basically be in flux. So you might get really lucky and maybe it starts
finishes for a minute.
Thank you. At the 4-week mark. But odds are not going to be good of that. It's probably going to be 6 to 8 weeks.
6 to 8 weeks is about right.
And so this is what you do after it's sat all by itself for 6 to 8 weeks. And I'm going to step off camera again so that we can give you better shots and you can see what's really happening.
All right, so our mead has been sitting for 6 to 8 weeks. You would have seen a layer of foam rise up on the surface of the mead inside the bottle. You would have seen that decline, and then if you'd have looked really closely, you'd have seen little air bubbles climbing up the side of the fermenter and bubbling out through the airlock. Since our mead now is finished fermenting, if you want to get a close-up on that, down at the bottom you can see that the yeast has settled out of solution and has formed about an inch thick layer on the bottom of the fermenter. What we're going to do now is we're going to take the liquid off of that yeast layer, get it into a fresh bottle, and we are going to add our flavoring. Now, any flavoring is appropriate for a mead. You can add any kind of fruit juice, you can add any combination of spices or herbs, you can add chili peppers if you want to, make a hot pepper mead. What I'm going to be doing with today's mead is I actually have some herbal tea bags that are going into my measuring cup here, and I've cooked up a little tea water, and we are going to steep the tea, and I'm going to make an herbal tea mead. So I've got a little over a pint of hot water there. Remember that we've only got 3 quarts of mead in the fermenter because we allowed space for the fermentation to take place. As this tea steeps, I'm going to get the rest of the mead into the clean jug and get it ready to be flavored. So my clean jug is full of the sanitizer solution. I'm going to go ahead and empty that out. And once again, I'm going to rinse it clean so that I don't have any residual sanitizer solution on the inside of the jug. And once I've got all the sanitizer rinsed out of there, I am also going to take the siphon equipment that we talked about during the first episode, and I'm going to get that rinsed clean as well, because I need to siphon the liquid off the yeast bed into the clean fermenter. So I take my siphon tube out of the water, roll that into the empty side of my sink, and again you want to get as much of the sanitizer off of this as possible. So I'm going to flush it to get all the sanitizer out of the inside of the tubing. I'm not as worried about getting the sanitizer off the outside of the tubing because the outside of the tube isn't going to come in contact with my liquid. I'm going to take my siphon starter and I'm going to rinse that clean. And piece that back together. I'm going to attach the siphon starter to my hose. And remember, if it comes in contact with your liquid, you want it to be sterile. So it's important that you keep your now sterile siphoning equipment from touching anything else in your kitchen that's not necessarily sterile. Now, in order to siphon correctly, the receiving vessel has to be lower than the donating vessel. So I am going to place this on the floor next to my kitchen counter. And one of the reasons I have 6 feet of hose is so I got plenty of room to play. I'm going to place the one end of the hose into the receiving vessel. I'm going to remove the airlock from the fermenter. And I'm going to slip this in just enough to get the bottom of the siphon starter into the liquid. Now the way a siphon starter works is very simple. You pull up on the siphon stick, that draws liquid into the outer tube. I push down and that will pump liquid through the tube into the receiving vessel. Once the siphon is started, all I have to do is monitor my siphon tube to make sure that I don't get it down into that layer of dead yeast at the bottom of the fermenter, because I don't want to suck any of that up into my siphon hose if I can avoid it. As I get further down, I'll start to tilt the jug just a little bit to make sure I get as much of the liquid as possible. And this goes fairly quickly once you get the siphon started. So you do have to keep an eye on it while you're working the hose. Needless to say, I am going to get some yeast sediment in there, but not enough that it's really going to affect the flavor of my finished mead. Disconnect the siphon hose, drain whatever's left into the hose into my receiving jug. And there is a clear transferred mead. Now, while we were doing that, our tea has had a chance to steep. So I'm once again going to take my funnel and I'm going to place that into the jug. So we've allowed our tea to steep until it's good and strong, and I've got we've got about a quart of tea in here, which should bring us up to a full gallon when we add it to our mead. Now I will go on to say that we talked about different flavors that you can add. Just a few things to mention on that. If you do add any additional sugar, if there is viable yeast that is still in your mead, you may wind up with a re-fermentation where it starts bubbling again. If that happens, you can just let it sit until it's done and the bubbling stops, and then you can do the siphon into another clean bottle like we showed earlier. You can re-sweeten on purpose if you think your mead is too dry or doesn't have enough flavor. One of the easiest ways to do it is to just take another smaller amount of honey, liquefy it like we did in an earlier episode, and add that to your jug, understanding that you may get some re-fermentation.
Okay, and Maddock, you're using very technical terms, so I just want to make sure that everyone understands that the reason why you would get re-fermentation is if you use something like a frozen lemonade or something with sugar in it.
Yes, actually anything with sugar, honey, corn syrup, anything like that is something that yeast will feed on and in order to produce more alcohol and carbon dioxide. So anything with sugar in it does run the risk of re-fermentation if you have any living yeast left in your jug.
But if you're using something like a tea, then you're fine because there's no sugar in it.
There's no sugar in the tea. Also, if you are using some kind of fruit juice, frozen concentrate, anything like that, if you check the label and you see something along the lines of potassium sorbate or sodium benzoate added to preserve freshness, those are chemical sterilization agents. What they will do is they will actually help prevent re-fermentation by preventing the yeast from being able to process any additional sugars. So while I don't advocate using those when you're going for your primary ferment, it would be perfectly acceptable for you to add them at the end when you're bottling like we're doing now, and it would minimize the risk of having that happen.
And of course, if you need help, reach out to the Brewers Guild.
Absolutely, at Brewers, www.ethelmark.org. We are there for you. So I'm going to pull my tea bags out of the tea and set those aside. I've got my clean and sterile funnel here. Once again, being cautious about pouring the hot liquid in so that I don't get splashback from the hot air escaping. And you will note that it is going to take our absolutely clear mead and make it a little bit less clear in the short term. That is not a long-term worry. And in this case, I am actually coming up a little bit short of a gallon. We're just going to add a little bit more water because the less airspace I have in the jug, the less chance I have of causing what's called oxidation, which will make your mead taste funny after a while. So I'm going to take it right up to about an inch or two from the top of, the jug. That minimizes that amount of oxygen that I've got in there. The jug is about skin temperature, which means it is perfectly safe for me to screw the cap on without having to worry about a vacuum forming in there. Now, I can serve it from this gallon jug anytime I want to, and if you're going to a major event like War Practice or Penzic, this is a great way to carry your homebrewed beverage for service to multiple people. If you want smaller bottles, the same siphon equipment that we used to get this out of the fermenting vessel and into this jug can be used to fill smaller bottles. That's where the bottling wand actually comes into play. So that loose end of the hose that we had just dangling inside the jug would connect to the bottling wand. You have a little lever here on the bottom that goes up and down. So when you touch the bottom of the bottle, it will allow the liquid to flow. When you lift it off the bottom of the bottle, it drops down and cuts off the flow at that point. So you can use this to fill smaller bottles out of your gallon jug without having to worry about overflowing the bottles. As soon as the liquid comes to the top, you just lift up the wand, pull it out. It will leave enough airspace for you to cork the bottle, or you can use screw cap bottles if you prefer. You can even use old crownlet beer bottles and use the metal bottle caps if you like. This is a very handy tool for that because it does size the liquid inside your bottle very handily. I highly recommend that once you've bottled the liquid, you put some sort of label on there. It can be a fancy pre-printed color label with your heraldry and all kinds of information on it. It can be a piece of duct tape written on with a Sharpie pen. The important thing is that people dipping into this bottle know what ingredients you used, so that if anybody is allergic to anything, they don't wind up imbibing it because they didn't have that information beforehand. So always put a label on there. I recommend including the date that you brewed it, the date that you bottled it, any ingredients that you put into it, and I like a catchy name as well. Last thing I will talk about is re-sweetening. Let's say that after a few days of sitting here you decide to sample your mead and it comes out tasting a little dry, or you don't think the honey flavor is strong enough. Take some extra honey, heat it up, make sure it's liquefied exactly the same way that we did with the honey that we made the batch out of. You can dissolve it in hot water, you can microwave it to get it down to a liquid form, and then in small amounts stir it into the jug until you get the right taste. So you can actually add honey to flavor or add honey to taste, and that will re-sweeten it. Again, because you're adding a sugar, just be aware that you may start fermentation in that bottle again. That's about all there is to it. Once again, if you have any questions, the Brewers Guild is available at brewers.ethelmark.org. You can recognize most of us around any event by the little belt favor with the barrel and the escarbuncle on it. And if you have no other avenue, just jump on Facebook and scream, "Matic, I need help," and somebody will direct your post to myself or one of the other brewers in the kingdom. Thank you very much for paying attention, and you guys have a great war practice.